Ad hoc processes have been the state of play from the beginning. At the beginning of the outbreak, the pandemic, you'd go into some facilities who had already stood up PPE and others where they didn't for weeks, months. Ad hoc has been the state of play, and it's a real tragedy for people who work in aged care that they're subjected to this and then have to deal with that with family members and patients and residents who are really often unclear what's permissible and what's not. So there's clearly a need for things to be standardized to some extent. But I think the bigger question behind it around, do we make it mandatory for people to be fully vaccinated? I think it's a really difficult one. And I had to push myself to think of those scenarios where I've had, for example, people who are end of life, and death isn't always quick. People can be dying slowly with dementia, where having access to somebody who is maybe unvaccinated will be the difference between them living a miserable end of life and a protracted end of life, or just enjoying some sort of dignity. So I think the points that were made there around how do we manage to find choices with boundaries. So yes, we will allow people who are unvaccinated to come in. Here are the circumstances, and this is what we will do to mitigate that risk, whether it's point of care testing at entry, requiring that people actually get formally swabbed in the lead up to coming in, or regularly swabbed and provide evidence of that, and then wearing masks or additional measures within the facility to try and reduce that risk, acknowledging that to have that sort of mandate can be really difficult to put in place when people are in aged care and still really need that comfort of human connection, and just to deal with the practicalities of what is in aged care.
You said to our producer Garda, dementia patients are dying of loneliness. How can you tell if somebody's dying of loneliness?
But the evidence is there. I think the Office of National Statistics in the UK said that they had 65% a 65% increase in deaths from dementia during the lockdowns. People with dementia are often very disoriented, and having without those anchor points, that the human socialization, even at those stages of advanced dementia and sort of mental disarray, is profoundly distressing. And people will stop eating, they'll stop interacting, they'll stop toileting, and they really deteriorate rapidly. And I've seen that in facilities during lockdown. So there's no sort of question around, is it real? Yes, people with dementia, when they don't have those anchor points and attempts at normal socialization, deteriorate a lot faster, disengage, and eventually die. And we've seen that here in the UK, in the US, and other contexts where there are high numbers of people with dementia in facilities.
And you've seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen it. They stop talking, stop eating, stop drinking. How long do you have if you're not talking, not eating, not drinking, and not sleeping well anymore? Not to mention the distress for the people in that facility who have to watch that and observe that deterioration and not even have the benefit or that, that succor of being able to say, look, we can get a family member in to come and sit with you and to help alleviate some of that distress that dementia patients really experience intensely.
Everald, in introducing you to the audience, for those who don't know you, you are the longest serving elder of the Uniting Church in Australia. How long have you been an elder of the Uniting Church?
Well, between the Presbyterian Church first and then the Uniting Church after Church Union, 63 years altogether.
And in that capacity, you regularly visit presumably people younger than your good self at 90 years of age in residential aged care. Tell me about the experiences that you've had during COVID.
Well, the experience that I've had is very much like has just been said a moment ago. There are two things in this issue. How do we stop older people from dying of COVID? How do older people get a life? And I think that one of the great weaknesses of the aged care system in Australia, with COVID or not, is how do people have a life no matter what? And when you're in a home like that and no one can come to see you, it's an enormously distressing experience. I had one old chap who was a great friend of mine. I tried to visit him many times, was stopped, and when I finally got there, he was so emotional about the fact that he hadn't seen me for a long time or any other mates. It took him a long time just to settle down and to tell me what loneliness is like, sitting and watching the clock all day long. So I think we've got to say to ourselves, what is the worst for a person? To die of COVID quickly because there's no vaccine, or for them to actually die in some sort of mental tension because, you know, they've been neglected. And I've found it's very important for older people to have young children come to see them. I can go and see them as often as they want, but they love to see their grandchildren now, and any children, and if they're stopped from doing that, that's an enormous hole in their lives. And I'm quite aware that when I go to see anyone, I go to see older people who are having home care outside, you know, it all. When you go to see them, you know that even though you've vaxxed, I've had my 2 jabs and I'm going to have a booster, I could still carry that disease in there. It doesn't stop. And so overall, we've got to look at it and say we've got a very human situation. And the worst thing that can happen to a person in old age is for you to lock them away. Death is preferable to them being locked away.
Wow.